Hi, this is Miss Cairo. This is a preview to lesson 3-4. And in lesson 3-4, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be using models and then straightforward multiplication to solve problems in which we're multiplying two fractions by each other. And we're going to learn that we're always going to arrive at a fraction for our answers. So those were fraction bars. So we'll have our numerators here in our denominator. So fraction times a fraction, we are going to be arriving at a fraction as our answer. And one way that we can solve these problems is through a diagram. And it's fairly complicated, so that's why we're doing a preview for this lesson. And to draw out these diagrams for today's lesson, what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to get out a few different kind of materials that we don't usually use for math. So listen carefully. I'd like you to get out a piece of plain paper, like computer paper, white piece of paper. If you have it at home, great. If you don't have that, binder paper will work just fine. And then I would like you to look for, if you have colored pencils or markers, colored pencils would work best, or if you have markers, that's great too. If you have a colored pencil that's red and blue, and then some kind of a dark color, hopefully black would work too. Go ahead and get those materials out and ready. And then again, if you don't have any coloring materials or you don't have, if you don't have coloring materials, a pencil works just fine. I'll be teaching you how to use just a pencil. Or if you're missing like a red, any other color will do. I'll just be referring to red and blue. You're gonna maybe have to substitute that if you need to. So if you need to pause the video to gather those materials, go ahead and do that. And if not, let's get started. So with drawing diagrams for multiplying two fractions, again, we're going to be doing something a little different here. We're going to be doing some shading in with two different colors. So here's the problem that we're going to work with. I'd like you to, okay, we're going to solve the problem 2/3 times 4/5. So go ahead and write that nice and small somewhere at the top of your paper. And I'm going to do this with multiple steps that we won't necessarily follow going forward, but I'm going to take it step by step with you. So when we're solving these problems, we're going to draw a diagram. And what that diagram is going to be, it's going to be a square box. And let me go ahead and where's that tool? Okay, cool. I'm going to draw a square box. You don't have to do it just yet. We're going to draw, I'll show you what the end drawing is going to look like. We're going to draw two boxes, and then we're going to put our drawings together into a third box. So draw out somewhere on yours, the best you can, 3 equal boxes. There's going to have to be quite a bit of room in between your boxes. That's going to allow you to, we're going to be doing some shading, drawing, separating within the boxes, okay? So I have 3 boxes, do you? And let's go ahead and let's start to label and walk through how we're going to break these boxes up into to represent 2/3 times 4/5. So what I'd like you to do with your pencil, or if you have a black marker or a black colored pencil, we're going to label the top of this first box 4/5. And actually taking one step back, these boxes, so this first box that we just labeled is going to represent one whole. Okay, so working with two fractions, they're both less than one whole. This whole array is going to be worth one whole, and we're going to be shading and breaking them apart to represent 4/5 and then 2/3, and then see what they are overlapped. Okay, so go ahead and draw 4/5 at the top. We're going to be separating this box into groups of 5 to represent our 5 as our denominator. So, and what we're going to do is we're going to do vertical lines to represent, and we're going to try and make them as even as possible. So I know some of you are working with markers, in which you won't be able to erase. So make sure you're doing a really careful job. You can even watch me do it first and then you attempt it. So I'm going to do one group there, 2, 3, 4 lines to break this box or one hole into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 parts. So you go ahead and carefully do that. And again, if you need to pause, go ahead and do that. And what we're going to do is we are going to shade in blue shadings to represent 4 parts of this of our array or of our whole, 4 parts out of 5. And watch as I do it. So I've already split it up into 5 groups. I'm going to be shading 4 of these 5 groups, and I'm just going to use vertical or sorry, not vertical, diagonal lines really clearly and really just simply, carefully, whatever way you want to call it. Watch as I do it. So I'm going to count over 1, 2, 3, 4. I want to shade in all of these 4 pieces using diagonal lines, and watch as I do it. Just slashing them through all the way through. And I'm doing it really simply. And now I can clearly see that 4/5 of this hole is shaded in. So what I'd like you to do, practice your diagonal lines. Just a few works as long as you get that visualization that we shaded in 4 out of a total of 5 parts. Okay, and again, if you need to pause, go ahead and do that. If not, let's keep going. So there's one box that's 4/5 is represented here. Let's use this box over here to represent 2/3. And how we're going to do that is I'm going to put 2/3 here on the side. And again, I'm going to be splitting and shading to represent what 2/3 of this one hole is. And I'm going to use horizontal lines. And what I'm going to first do is I'm going to figure out how many total pieces am I going to need to represent 2/3. Well, total pieces, we're looking at our denominator here. What's our denominator? 3. So again, watch me as I do it. I'm going to do it with my black ink. If you have your black marker or your pencil, that works. Let's do 3 groups. 1, 2 lines to break it up into 3 equal groups. 1, 2, 3. Does yours look like mine? Great. And now let's do some shading. We're going to shade in a different color here, and you'll see why in a moment. And watch as I do it first. I'm going to choose the color red. If you had your red, great. If you're using a different color, great. If you're using a pencil, here's what you're going to do. I'm going to use diagonal lines, but I'm going to have them go the opposite direction in which I chose to do for the blue lines, so that, and again, there's a process to this. You'll see why we're doing it in a little bit. So I have 1, 2, 3 pieces here. Again, we're shading in 2 parts to represent 2/3. I'm going to shade in 1 part here, 1 part here, and I'm going to leave this one blank. And watch as I do it. I'm going to do my red diagonal lines, shade in through 2 parts. 2 parts out of a total of 5. And I just had to do a few, kept it really simple, kept it really neat. Go ahead and try it too. And now we have 2/3 of this array filled in. Okay. We're going to put them together for our last box. Because what I basically did is I broke them apart. Here's 4/5, here's 2/3. I want to know what 2/3 of 4/5 is. I want to take this 4/5 and I want to shade in 2/3 of 4/5 to figure out what our product is. What is 2/3 of 4/5? So let's put them together. And again, we won't necessarily be using all 3 of these steps going forward. I'll be showing you how we're doing that soon. So at the top of this, we're going to use the same steps that we did to label 4/5 on this box. So label 4/5 at the top, split it into 5 groups. And with your blue coloring tool, or your pencil, you're going to use diagonal lines going one direction, and you're shading in 4 out of 5 groups. Does yours look like mine? If you need to pause, go ahead and pause. Keep it really simple, keep it really neat, because there's a process to this. Now, on this side, we're going to basically be overlapping them. we're going to write 2/3. I want to know what 2/3 of 4/5 is. So I'm going to write 2/3 here. I'm going to split this up into 3 parts using lines. So I'm going to put one part here, 3 total parts. And remember, same steps that we just did. How many of 3 parts am I going to shade in to represent 2/3? 2 parts of 3 parts. So I'm going to be shading in my diagonal red lines going the opposite direction. And this is the reason why I had to do it two times up here. It's a little hard to follow. So what you're basically going to do is you're going to ignore all the shading in blue that we just did, and you're going to ignore these vertical lines that we just did. Look at this image as if you're just looking at one part here, one part here, and one part here. And so I'm going to shade in all the way across to represent 2/3 shaded in for this one hole. And then the last step, we're going to do an equal sign. And before we do that, does yours look like mine? Is it nice and neat? I hope. Okay. And then we're going to do a fraction bar because, again, with these problems, anytime you multiply 2 fractions by each other, you're going to get a fraction as your answer. So I already know I'm going to have a numerator and I know I'm going to have a denominator here. Our denominator, remember, what's the definition of a denominator? How many total pieces are one whole split up into? Well, I split this one whole up into quite a few different pieces. I split it up into 5 and then to 3. I can look at it like this way. What's 5 times 3? Or you can individually count them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Or in other words, 5 times 3 is 15 total pieces there are in this array. Our denominator is 15. And our numerator here is going to be how many pieces did we double shade? Did we shade both in red and in blue? Or if you're using a pencil, how many parts are double shaded, having the diagonal lines going one way, diagonal lines going the other? So let's go ahead and count. What did you get? How many pieces? I got 8. Did you get 8? If so, if not, go back and double count. So I'm looking at boxes that have red and blue or 2 different directions of line. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That is our numerator. How much is double shaded? And then, so as you can clearly see, these 2 were just shaded in with red. These 4 were just shaded in with blue. This one was blank. What we just did is we figured out what 2/3 of 4/5 is. We took 4/5. That's what we started off with. We shaded in 2/3 of 4/5 using our other lines, and we arrived at 8/5. 2/3 times 4/5 is equal to 8/15. Do you see, take a look at that whole multiplication sentence. Do you see a shortcut way of solving these problems? I hope so, but we got to first master how to draw the diagrams first, okay? Thanks for following along so closely, and more drawing and coloring to come.